Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for today's presentation. We pull up the correct page here. So it is Monday, August 15th, 2022. Today's session is entitled, Get Ready for Your Next Job Interview. Today's job seeker must be prepared for any interview scenario by Skype or Zoom, by phone or in person. This session will outline steps to get yourself prepared, tips for handling various interview situations, what information is essential to brush up on, as well as potential questions you'll need to be ready to answer. And please bring your interviewing questions for the Q&A afterward. So this webinar is led by Elizabeth Gross, who's the founder of Job Search Divas. Let me let Cindy in. A former marketing executive at Monster.com. Elizabeth's assisted countless people with their resumes and job searches. Elizabeth was a featured speaker at South by Southwest, presenting the talks, You've Just Been Laid Off, Now What? And Conquering Your Job Search Journey. She holds a BA in professional writing from Carnegie Mellon University. So all 30 of us or so, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Elizabeth for joining us this afternoon. And Elizabeth, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to share my screen and get the presentation going. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this afternoon. I'm excited to talk to you about how you're going to get ready for your next job interview. So we are going to, I'll go through first what we're going to be covering. Which if I can get, first I'll go through Job Search Divas. Sorry, I just was a little backwards there. What we're going to be doing today is talking about getting ready for your next job interview. What are the things that Job Search Divas helps people with? All different types of things as you are navigating your job search journey. I help people with their resumes. I help them with LinkedIn profiles, cover letters, job search strategy, how they're going after the next opportunity. And then finally, I help folks rehearse and prepare for interviews. And that's obviously what we're going to be covering today. So here's how we're going to go through everything. We're going to start with what you need to prepare as you're getting ready for your next job interview. We're going to talk about what questions you should ask in an interview. We're going to go through different interview scenarios to prepare for, because there's many different kinds these days. And we're going to spend a little time specifically talking about the virtual interview, which is obviously, gained popularity during COVID. Now some of that seems to be here to stay. So we've got some special tips around how you're going to handle those virtual interviews. Tips for success, how to make sure you're making the most of your interview preparation, how you're going to follow up afterwards. And then I'm going to summarize everything so that we can go through how you're going to get ready for your next job interview. And then, as Robert mentioned, we're going to have time at the end for Q&A. Of course, if there's a point during the meeting that you can't hear something I said, or you want me to repeat it, or I need to explain it further, please raise your hand. Robert will stop me and we will cover your question, and then we'll get right back into it. So, but let's get started now. Let's start by talking about what you're going to prepare. So an interview is coming. You've got it on the schedule. Or even if you don't have it on the schedule yet, but you know it's going to be scheduled, what do you want to do to make sure you're ready? The first thing you want to make sure is that you are really prepared with your knowledge about the company. So you want to learn as much as you can about the organization that you're interviewing with. Go to their website. Look for news articles or press releases, things that they've been that they put out there about their company. Google the company and see what comes up that might be written by a third party, or third party organizations that might cover things that are going on at the company. If you have access to Hoovers, that can be a really good resource to find out more about the organization. And then of course, LinkedIn. So today, every company, most every company, I should say, most every business, any organization has a LinkedIn page, a LinkedIn business page. And that page will cover things like what their mission is, how many employees, where they're located, things that you might also be able to get on their website, but it might also take that in a different spin. So definitely spend some time on LinkedIn looking at information about the company. If you're interested in knowing what other employees who work there have to say, you could check out Glassdoor and see how many things are written about them on Glassdoor. So, Glassdoor, like many user-generated content vehicles, might have some bad reviews and some good reviews, but I think it's always useful to kind of check out what's going on there. There's always going to be a disgruntled employee who takes to the internet to write something, but oftentimes we can kind of read between the lines there and see who's authentic and who's just venting. But Glassdoor is a useful tool as you're preparing for your interview. If you're somebody that's very connected on Twitter or Instagram, you could check out their pages there as well. And then finally, if the company has a product that's accessible to you, you should use it. You should try it out. Try out whatever their product is so that you get a sense of what it's like to be a customer of theirs, whether it's you're ordering something from them or you're using the product and how you're interacting with it. So give that a try, because the more knowledge you have about what they do, what they produce, the better prepared you'll be for your interview. So the next thing after you've kind of delved in and found out everything you can about the company is really research who you're meeting with. So a lot of the same steps apply, right? Obviously, you're going to go on LinkedIn and check out their pages on LinkedIn, how long they've worked at the company. Maybe they've held a couple different roles. Where did they go to college? Do you have any connections in common? LinkedIn's a great resource for being able to research who you're meeting with. You can also Google that person and see if there's any, again, third-party information on them that comes up. And then maybe if you do have a connection in common, you might reach out to that connection and just get a little insight on, what this person's like or what they might be like to talk to. All the information that you can get prior to the interview is helpful, right? So even a perspective of someone that knows this person from another, maybe personally or from another job. So do as much research as you can around the people you're going to interview. And this goes for everybody. So this goes for the hiring manager, even the recruiter that you might talk to during the phone screen or the screener stage. Research everybody as much as you can, because you want to make sure you're fully prepared for this meeting and you want to be knowledgeable about them and about the company. Another very important thing to prepare is what your qualifications are for the job. What's your relevant experience? What are the accomplishments and achievements that you have had in your career as it relates to their job posting and the requirements that they've listed in that posting? It's really essential that you're not just giving answers based on what you can do. It's how you can frame those answers in terms of what they're looking for. So you might even take that job posting in your preparation phase and see if you can identify a few key themes and aspects of the job that seem most important. And then when you're in the interview scenario, make sure you're answering your questions, giving those themes some prominence. So if I'm, making this up, obviously, but if if one of the key themes is exceptional attention to detail, you might want to talk about different examples during the interview scenario where you managed the details and you successfully managed the details or the project or the process. So you want to weave in those examples that help reinforce your qualifications as they relate to the requirements in the job. You also want to, and this is very useful, is to rehearse your answers to potential interview questions. Now, of course, there are a million interview questions that you could be asked in an interview, and you could spend a lot of time rehearsing answers to all of them, but I've provided, and Robert's putting that in the chat, some sample questions that will really help frame out some of your answers to the questions that could likely come up in an interview. So we're going to take a look at that in a second, but before we leave this slide, I just want to mention, obviously, LinkedIn being that resource that we talked about before. We talked about how they're a good resource on LinkedIn for not only the information about the company, but the person or people you're going to be meeting with. So let's take a look. Does everyone have the handout? And if you don't, let us know. So these questions are a sampling of questions that will really help you kind of get your head around the types of questions you could be asked and how you want to present your answers. So we're not going to talk about all of them, but you certainly could rehearse your answers prior to an interview to all of them out loud with a friend or relative. You know, it really helps you crystallize your thoughts and your answers around things when you've rehearsed them a couple times in advance. And I'm not talking about being scripted and having everything written out. I'm talking about just being familiar and comfortable with the language that you're going to use. So doing that extra step of rehearsing your answers to those questions can be really useful. So one of the questions that is usually the one that a lot of folks don't like answering is one that sounds relatively simple. Tell me about yourself. Sounds simple, but folks just a lot of times get hung up on this. My first piece of advice here is keep the answers here on the professional self, on your professional self versus your personal self. So you don't need to get into things like, oh, I'm, this old and I'm, live in this place. You don't need to share personal data or information. You don't need to tell people that you're married or whether you have kids or you don't have kids or you're a caregiver for someone in the family. You can keep all of those personal details out of it. And employers really, I think at this stage, don't really want to know that either. They want to understand how you are a good fit for the job. So I would keep your answers in this particular case really focused on your professional self. And if you've been involved with writing your summary statement for your resume, that a lot of times is a great reference point that you might want to go back and look at how you might answer that question, tell me about yourself, because this is really going to give you, a couple sentences, 3 or 4 sentences that help describe who you are and why you're the person that they should hire for this position, why you're a good candidate for the role. So you want to I wouldn't walk through your resume in this answer, the tell me about yourself, unless they ask you to. But what I would do is really, focus on, how you are presenting who you are, some of your background and history, and, wrapping it up with 1 or 2 facts that kind of weave in, again, those themes that we talked about from the job posting that you've noticed. So, this is a really important question in an interview, and it's also important to not let it get away from you. So you want to kind of be able to answer this question in a way that really, again, reinforces your candidacy for the role. Another question that's very useful is when you can give them an example of a time when, I'll use just this one. Give me an example of a time when you had to overcome a challenge to complete a project or a task successfully. So going into interview scenarios, it's really useful to have a few, and I call them case studies, but these could also be examples of how you have dealt with a certain situation and turned it around into a success. And maybe it was, a challenge, or maybe it was a project, or it could be a really big initiative that you took on. So it's a good rule of thumb to have a couple of these case studies prepared before an interview that cover a couple challenging situations you've experienced and how you've overcome them. you might have these included on your resume already as successes. Maybe you've created, an area on your resume where you've talked about these, but writing these out in a sort of a more detailed way will allow you to tell the full story behind that achievement. Review these case studies. Think about what your most important successes are, even if they're not from your most recent position. You might have ones that are from different times in your career. Review these and be familiar with the facts and the details so that you're not stumbling around or reaching for words or data. Like, have those all at the ready. Another tip that I have, especially for this this type of question where you're using a real-time example, is think about answering the question in the format of starting with the result, giving away the punchline at the beginning, then telling more about the situation, then telling what actions you took to resolve the situation, and then repeating that result again. So when you give away the punchline at the beginning, the idea is the person understands where the story's going. So they're not kind of having to follow you along as you tell all the details to get to that end. You've told them what you're going to explain to them, and then you've told them what the problem was that you had to address. Then you told them what actions you took to address the problem and how it was a success again. And let's use a marketing example. Maybe okay, here's the situation. The company I worked for needed to increase their YouTube followers by 10,000 people. They had a really great following on a number of other social media platforms, but they knew YouTube was an important channel for them. They didn't have enough followers, so we needed to put together a campaign to increase followers. So that's going to be the situation, right? So I'm going to start with the company I worked for in the marketing capacity. We had a campaign that resulted in 10,000 more YouTube followers. We needed more followers. Here's my situation. We needed more followers because we knew YouTube was an important channel for us to share information. We had other social media channels that were very strong, but we needed more on YouTube. How did we do it? And here's my action. We decided to use those other channels to distribute content and to have people also elect to join our YouTube channel. And when they saw that content, they realized they wanted more of it and they wanted to be involved with YouTube. So by creating a campaign where we utilize the other social media platforms, we were able to get more followers on YouTube. It's kind of a simplistic answer to the question, but you kind of get the point. So we gave away the punchline at the beginning, we told them how we did it, and then we repeated that again at the end. Let's talk about one of the other questions that seems to give people a lot of agita. Why are you leaving, or did you leave your last job? Okay, this is definitely one of the toughest questions. And it's really essential that when you're answering this question, you leave negativity out of it. Sometimes what you want to say is, this company that I work for is so dysfunctional. No one can make decisions. I'm stuck in a dead-end job. I don't get along with my boss. But you can't say any of those things. You need to keep it really high level and positive. And you should also practice the answer to this question so that you're comfortable saying it and it sounds authentic. So, you might answer this question in a way that kind of dances around some of those issues, but lets people just get through it so you can move on with the rest of the interview. So you might say something like, I've really enjoyed working at my company, but I'm looking for an opportunity to grow my skills and be part of a bigger organization where I can make more of an impact or learn more or, contribute more. So you've got sort of, you're thankful for where you were, but you really need to move on so that you can continue to grow as a professional. So that's one example of how you might think about answering that question. Okay, So what else are you going to be ready with for your interview? You're going to be ready for a bad interviewer. And this is tricky because you don't know when you're going to get the bad interviewer. And I'm sure many of you have had bad interviewers where you feel like, I'm not able to get a word in edgewise. Maybe the person is talking so much about the job or the company or their position or something else that you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, like time's a ticking and they're not asking me any questions. I'm not able to share anything about myself. All they've got is my resume and I am not able to get a word in edgewise. So it's really important to have a strategy for this because it can happen. And it's, you don't want to leave anything. You don't want to leave a meeting like that thinking, geez, I should have redirected this somehow. So you really need a strategy to redirect the conversation to the job and your skills. And maybe one of the strategies you could think about is, if you need to sort of redirect the conversation, you could say, hey, I would like to ask a question about how much project management is really included in this job, because I actually have, a history of project management and being very successful in project management roles. And so I'd love to be able to share that a little bit of that with you as we talk about the project management responsibilities in the position. And you can see if that kind of pause and kind of shift will help you break that cycle of this interviewer not really letting you get any information in otherwise. So you need to really have a strategy around that. Know that there's some times where people on the interviewing side are just as nervous as you are. And so that may get them into a mode of not really having a good balance for the interview. So you want to make sure you have a strategy for how to address that. And so the final thing there's many things you can obviously be prepared with, but one of the other things is to have your questions ready. So you're going to need to be ready for that point in the interview where they say to you, whether it's the hiring manager or the HR person or whomever, they're going to say, what would you like to ask me? Or do you have any questions for me? And the answer cannot be no. It needs to be, yes, I have questions. And yes, I'd like to ask them. So you need to have some questions prepared. And I'm just going to go on to the next slide. So think a minute here. So we're going to do this activity together. So guys, I want everybody to think about what questions will you ask during the interview. And then if you could put those in the chat, Robert will read those to us and we'll talk about them a little bit. So take a minute to think of questions you'd ask in an interview situation of your future employer. And then consider, as you're thinking about these questions, how do you position yourself through those questions as a strong candidate? And then we'll talk about them a little bit. And my pro tip here is really, leave the what's in it for me questions for a later point in the interview process. So consider the first couple phases of an interview as ones where you're really getting to know whether the company is somebody you want to work, a company you want to work for, whether you have, you're aligned in terms of what your skills are and what they're looking for, whether you like the folks that you're interviewing with. But I leave the questions for later about like, what are the hours and, how much vacation time do I get? What's the salary? Of course, they might ask you that anyway, but what your requirements are. But and flex time, I would keep some of that stuff out of it in the first phase and just think about, the questions that really position you as a strong candidate. So what have we got, Robert? Do we have any questions coming in?
A couple of questions so far. 1 second. Let's see. What do you want of the new hire in the first 3 months? What are current pain points where the team needs support? Lorraine, I like this one. Why didn't you hire me when I interviewed 2+ years ago? Sue asks, what are the priorities of the position? Anne suggests, what would a typical day look like in this position? Similar, what's a typical day at work? Angela's, how does the team communicate and coordinate their work? Nancy says, what do you like best about working here? Maria, are there aspects within the company that need to be improved that I might be able to help with? Cindy says, so Cindy, I think we're going to skip that for now. Any other questions that you would ask the interviewer?
So I think those are fantastic. Everybody, that's exactly the kind of thing that I would bring to an interview situation. Especially about, an icebreaker on your side could be, why did you join the company, or what do you like about working here? So really getting the personal aspect of your interviewer's frame of mind about where they work. But also, what does your role that you're interviewing for have, how does it contribute to the company's mission, right? So how does this role further the company's mission? How do I fit in if I'm going to work in this organization? How about this question? This is one that I think is pretty good. Tell me about your most successful employees. What do they do differently? So that obviously would be a question that you would ask the hiring manager, who manages the team that you'd be reporting to. How about what you expect someone in this position to accomplish in the first 30 days, the first 60 days, the first 90 days? And, also it's important to show that you're interested in staying with the company, and being able to continue to contribute. So you might ask, what are the opportunities for growth and advancement? What I also always want folks to remember to ask, and we get caught up in this a little bit sometimes, right, in this interview situation, and we forget to ask some of the really important questions, like, what are the next steps in this process? Where am I in the interview cycle? Am I, candidate number 1, or am I candidate number 52? And, when do you guys think you'll be making a decision, and what can I expect? So it's very important to be able to ask that question as well in the interview scenario. So all of those, I think, you could certainly go into an interview with, 10 or 15 questions. The likelihood is you're going to be able to ask just a few. So I would make sure you have some of those as your priority questions. And then if you get a chance to ask more, obviously, you can have those others as backup. Okay, so now let's talk about the different scenarios that we are encountering today in the world of interviewing, right? So there's different types. First of all, you're most likely going to, if you get chosen to go through the interview process, oftentimes you start that with a phone screen. And a phone screen is obviously something that happens over the phone. And it's usually with someone in HR or somebody who's more junior in the organization, who's just determining whether or not you are qualified for the role. It's as important a step in the interview process as everything else that we've talked about. Even though it might be with someone with HR, these are the folks that are holding the keys to move you on to the next phase. So the preparation for this phone screen is as important as all of the other types of interviews that you'll go through. What's really essential during a phone screen is that you have a quiet environment in terms of the way you want to handle this, that your phone, obviously that you have a good connection. But also, because there's only the words that you are saying over the phone, it's just your voice that we have to be able to share. You don't have any body language. You're not, able to see the person's face. Think about how you want your voice to come across. And when we think about smiling when we're talking, usually that gives a better inflection to our voice. So think about keeping a smile on your face as you're having this conversation. You might also want to make sure you're full of energy and not, feeling like schlumpy on the couch, where you might have a really low kind of non-energetic voice. So think about walking around while you're on the phone and walking from room to room to keep your energy level high and to keep your adrenaline going. So, I call it a power pose, standing up on the phone, moving around, you're really keeping your energy high and keeping your voice really positive in your inflection. We're going to cover the virtual interviews on the next slide, but what I want to hop to now is the automated interviews. So these are very popular with larger organizations. And I've even heard of them recently. Even some smaller organizations are using this automated interview scenario. And if anyone's been through this, it's quite an interesting approach. But basically what it is you get a request for an interview and it's not going to have a person at the other end. It's you using a platform to answer interview questions, and oftentimes it's filmed. So it's going to be sort of anonymous in terms of who's on the other end, because you don't know that yet. But what I would recommend is if you do get a request for an automated interview, plan your time out to review the preview that they send, do all the practice runs that they allow you to do, and play them back so that you can refine your answers and be ready for the final version. Take as much time as they will give you to rehearse and prepare for that, and reviewing and rerunning the program as much as they'll allow you to do. And now we're slowly getting back into in-person interviews, which is exciting. Many companies will still choose the virtual, but there's often opportunity to do in-person. So my recommendations here is, as you're preparing for this interview scenario, make sure you arrive at least 30 minutes before. Whether you sit in the parking lot or you're at a coffee shop down the street, what you don't want to do is be flustered and late, and maybe the directions weren't exactly what you thought they were going to be if you were driving, or the train was late and it made you a little bit anxious. You want to give yourself that buffer of time so that it helps you plan for any unexpected situations. And when you get there, you can review your questions again. You can, prepare and just kind of get yourself in a good frame of mind for your interview. I also recommend leaving your phone off during the interview, because you don't want it to be distracting. You don't also want to be kind of engaged in your phone when you're sitting waiting for someone to come pick you up to take you to the interview setting. So I would really recommend putting the phone away, leaving it off, so that it's not a distracting thing. And instead, look around at the environment that you're in. What's happening? Is this, is it an interesting environment? What are the things that they're doing in this office? If you're interviewing in person. So you also might want to make sure that you have copies of your resume. That can also be important when you're in person, because sometimes people might not have had a chance to read it, or they didn't bring a copy with them. And then finally, if you're going to be there for a period of time, make sure you bring some snacks. I mean, I'm somebody that doesn't do well if I'm not operating on a full stomach. So make sure you've got something in your bag or, handy that you can, have some almonds or granola bar or whatever, in case things run long, in case people forget to offer you anything. You want to make sure you're covered. So my pro tip here is, no matter what format your interview is, your preparation steps are all the same. You want to do all the research on the company, the people you're interviewing with. All of these steps are the same, no matter what the format is. But let's go on to the virtual format. So Zoom interviews, Skype, Meet, Teams, these are very popular now, obviously with COVID. But there are things that we need to kind of keep in mind. A lot of us might be familiar with working on Zoom all the time for what we do for work. But when you're meeting someone for the first time, you want to make that best impression, just like you would be if you were going in person. So think about what your interview outfit's going to be. same as if you were going in person. You want to make sure it's professional, that it fits well, that it's appropriate for a work setting, that you're comfortable. The lighting for your Zoom interview should come from the front, not overhead or behind you, so that it's sort of blowing out like as a really distracting element behind you. So you want to make sure the lighting comes from the other side of your screen. And you can put a lamp back there if you don't have a window. You can mess around with that a little bit and see what works best on screen. Make sure the background is neutral and free from distracting elements, personal items, no animals running around, as much as possible. And then really make sure you're looking straight into the camera. So one of the things that can be a little bit tricky about virtual interviews is where the people's that you're interviewing with, where their faces appear on the screen. And you can find yourself like looking down like this or over here because you want to look at them, but you're not really looking at them. What you need to be looking at is your camera. And so I actually, sometimes I'll put a Post-it note right on top of my laptop with an arrow telling me, don't forget to look at the camera, because the camera is what kind of keeping your eyes connected with the folks in your audience. So you want to also make sure that the laptop or your screen is at eye level. So you might need to do a little work on making sure that it is at eye level, that you're not getting cut off or you're not being shown from under here. You don't want to put it on your lap. So, you might need to move around in your wherever you're taking this interview from to make sure you've got the right level there. Use professional body language, right? So just like as if you were meeting in person, you want to be sitting up straight. Don't, be like this or slouched or, out of the frame. Just your 100% focus is keeping your shoulders up, keeping your body language positive and interested and engaged, right? That's what we're communicating even through Zoom. Of course, you want to test your technology beforehand. You want to make sure everything's working right. If they've sent you a type of meeting that you haven't used before, download it, test it out, even do a trial run or a practice with a friend. Just make sure that you feel good about the technology and that you can navigate it. And that your microphone works, your internet connection is strong, that your video is working. There's nothing more frustrating than getting into the meeting and then feeling like there's something that's off. So make sure that you can navigate all of those scenarios before you are as you're preparing for this interview. And then, even though it's easy to have because you have your computer, it might be tempting to have some of your things, your answers put on there for you to look at. You don't want to be looking around on your computer for things. So if you are overly scripted or you're reading from something, it's not going to come off well. So my advice is to be as natural and authentic as you can be. Again, this is why the rehearsing for the interview questions is important. But don't use a script or pre-prepared answers. If you have reminders that you want to give yourself about things you want to cover, you could stick them to the side of your screen so you can kind of keep your eyes on those, or even use a piece of paper with a few thoughts written down that you want to make sure that you cover during the interview scenario. But don't be, sort of let the computer be a distracting element. And so, yeah, the pro tip here is, let your personality come through. Our body language, our facial expressions, these are all an important part of virtual interviews, and they convey confidence. And so you might not be able to shake someone's hand over the Zoom, but you can always wave, hello, goodbye, it's nice to meet you. It's just a little bit of extra personality that you might add to your interview. Okay, so let's keep these in mind for things these tips that you want to keep in mind for success. So relating your answers to the specifics of the job description. We talked about this earlier. What are those themes and how can you relate your answers to that? Keep your answers short and to the point, using that framework with the giving away the result first, then talking about the situation, then the action, and then the result again. Think about that framework as you practice your answers and keep them to the point. Make sure you're listening when the interviewer is talking. Sometimes our adrenaline gets going and we're thinking, oh, I just want to answer this question, but take a breath, listen to what they're saying, and then formulate your answer. And then relax and be yourself. Don't, think about how you can harness the energy that's getting you ready for this. Sometimes we get a little nervous, but adrenaline can be a good thing. It gives us some energy. So just make sure that you are being yourself and relaxing as much as possible. An interview is a conversation between people, and you have conversations with people all the time. So if you can kind of put your head in that frame of mind, that maybe it'll help calm some of those interview jitters. And then how are we going to follow up? So, thank you notes are really a point of difference today. Everything is feeling a little bit, less personal because we might have done our interview on Zoom and we might have never met some of these folks ever. There's all different types of reasons why interviews are different and why our world is different today. But thank you notes are still a good practice. Even after you've met the recruiter in the phone screen, the hiring manager, or you've been in a panel interview, it's a good practice to always write a thank you note. It keeps you top of mind with the interviewer. Obviously, you want to try to make sure you get their contact information or business cards if you're in person. It used to be nice to be able to write a thank you note in the mail, but of course you want to make sure it gets there so that you're still top of mind. So I would say email is your primary method of delivering that thank you note, and make sure it's within the 24 hours after the meeting. So don't let it go too long, because you really do want to stay top of mind. And really, a thank you note can just be a simple piece of communication that says, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed, learning more about whatever the things are in the meeting that you covered, or maybe more about the company. And then reference a skill and expertise that you have that, again, is relevant to that role. Remember the themes and remember the discussion you had, and what is that last, piece of information that you could add in there to help keep you top of mind. And then just let them know that you're looking forward to hearing from them about next steps, and close it up. Short and sweet. Doesn't have to be long. A paragraph is plenty. So that, yes, and we talked about the email. So that's my pro tip. So let's review the steps for getting ready for your next job interview. You want to prepare. I cannot say enough about being prepared. You want to research the company information, the background of the people you're interviewing with. You want to review your skills and how they relate to that job description. What are the most important things that they're looking for, and what is it that you offer that you can connect with them? Rehearse those interview questions and prepare your own questions to ask. Have a strategy at the ready in case you run into a bad interviewer, and think about what that strategy is going to be. Plan accordingly for the type of format. Is it Skype? Is it Zoom? Is it automated? Are we just doing a phone screen? Are we going in person? Plan accordingly. All your steps are the same in terms of preparation. You just may have to modify them slightly depending on the format. Keep your tips for success in mind, and don't forget to follow up with thank you notes. So that is all I have for today. I am going to say thank you to everybody and then ask if you have questions for me.
All right, wonderful job, Elizabeth.